Well, abolitionism's origins as a public movement seem to lie in the 7 Years' War of the 1750s, when some Protestant colonists in North America begin to suspect that their wartime sufferings are divine punishment for some great national sin, and then to suspect that that sin might be slavery. In the late 1760s and early 70s, as British oppression began to grate on the American colonists, again, slavery resurfaces as an explanation for the judgment that was so evidently being visited on them. It's during the Revolutionary War of 1775 to 81 that American abolitionism first begins to win real victories, wiping the new nation's slate clean of the guilt of slavery isn't just an opportunity, it's an obligation. Now, in the event, slaveholding interests in the new United States were too strong, and the battle against slavery was frozen by the Constitution of 1787. But in Britain, the American War has the opposite effect. American independence makes abolitionism politically possible. With the American colonies gone, Britain's slaveholding lobby is badly weakened. And the shock of unimagined defeat again provokes the question, for what sin are we being punished? In 1783, in the year Britain conceded American independence, there's an answer ready to hand. It's also the year of a grotesque lawsuit in which the crew of a British slave ship, the Zong, tried to exploit a legal loophole. They had deliberately drowned 131 men and women from their cargo hold in the hope of making an insurance claim for their value. The lawsuit was about insurance fraud, not about mass murder, and the crew actually won it. But abolitionist publicists seized on the case. A British public for whom slavery had been both distant and abstract were suddenly confronted with what it really meant. The first petition to Parliament is organised the same year, and the line from there to the mass petitions of 1787 in the parliamentary campaign is a straight one. Now, the moral and spiritual horrors of slavery were nothing new. What made them urgent was national self-interest. The slave trade was, or so it now seemed, a national sin for which the nation as a whole had already been punished in the American War, and from which it could expect far worse to come. The slaving cities of Liverpool and Bristol, William Wilberforce warned, should expect the judgment once visited by God on the ancient slaving cities of Tyre and Sidon. Josiah Wedgwood's famous abolitionist miniature asked, "Am I not a man and a brother?" That's not a question. It's an accusation. There is only one answer to that question, and to give it is, for a British viewer, to speak judgment on yourself, and therefore to be stirred to act. And act they did. They petitioned, they subscribed to periodicals, they boycotted sugar and other slave-grown produce. If we purchase the commodity, we participate in the crime, one pamphlet warned. For a growing swathe of the British public, men and women who had never met a slave and who had rarely seen a black face, the prospect of participating in this far-off crime suddenly became intolerable, and so it ended. That should have almost been the end of the story. Britain's abolition of the slave trade led the way to a general abolition, far more slowly than campaigners wished, but fast enough to leave businessmen all over the Atlantic fazed by this moral spasm that Britain had gone through. The United States bans the import of slaves in the same year, in 1807. Britain, dominant in Europe after the defeat of Napoleon in 1815, progressively strong-armed the other European powers into banning the trade in theory, and the British Navy strangled it in practice over the remainder of the century.